You need more than just a logo to be a strong brand. You need a vision and mission. Many companies and executives are going to say, well, we have a vision and mission. The vision and mission will be something like, we shoot for the stars. Great. How do your customers relate to that? Because I don't know what that means. You have these lofty statements, and they should be lofty to some degree, but they should be grounded in reality with the research that you've done.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Exact Digital Podcast, where we talk to the people building bold brands and doing real work that actually moves the needle. Today, I'm joined by Kaleb Alexander, Brand and Marketing Director at Redhype, a brand-first creative marketing agency that helps companies clarify their identity and show up consistently across every touchpoint. Redhype acts as an agency of record for many of their clients, managing everything from strategy and creative to campaigns and content. In today's episode, we'll dive into what it means to be a brand first agency, how Redhype balances long term strategy with creative execution, and how creative strategies need to actually talk to each other. Also, how to build better client relationships by focusing on trust over trends. Kaleb, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kenzie, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so good to see you again. We got the lovely chance to meet in person a couple of weeks ago, and we were at this probably one of the best coffee shops that I've been to. It's gorgeous.
It's pretty great. I was excited when I first saw it because it's brand new. It's like just a few months old, right on Main Street, downtown Greenville. And I was like, as a coffee connoisseur that doesn't really know that much about coffee, he just likes a latte. I was like, this looks like a good idea. So yeah, I went in there and I was like, this is perfect. I didn't have to alter anything. So yeah, no, if anybody wants to come to Greenville, South Carolina, it's called Celia with a T, Tselia, and it's on Main Street.
For those who don't know Redhype yet, how would you describe your philosophy as a brand first agency?
Great question. So we're a full service agency, meaning we do everything that you would need from branding to web design to marketing and all of that. We typically operate as agency of record or AOR, which means that these companies that have multiple agencies involved, there's usually one agency that's kind of overseeing everything. And they have kind of the brunt of the work. And then you might have some specialist agencies focusing on certain things. So we're usually operating as that main overarching agency. But we have a unique approach where although we do full service marketing, we do it we're always focused on the brand. So most of the time when people say branding, they think logo, they think visuals. It's so much more than that. Maybe we can get into that later, but because it's so much more than that, it's like foundational to business growth. We make sure that the brand is strong first so that whenever you do go to market or whenever you just continue going to market, because a lot of companies, not every company we work with is a startup, then you're set up well for more success than you would have had if you didn't have a strong brand. And so everything we do, whether it's just a website or whether it's just a piece of collateral or whether it is a full-blown advertising campaign, we make sure that everything is kind of cohesive with what that company's brand is. And so that's when we say brand first, that's what we mean. No matter where you are as a company, when you come into working with us in a partnership, that's the first thing we're going to be auditing is like, how strong is this brand? Do you guys know who you are? Do you know where you're going? Do you have all the assets in place? And if you do, are they good enough? Do you think they can withstand the massive pressure you're about to feel in the marketplace and all that competition? Are you positioned well enough? All this stuff that we take into account. So we're definitely not the agency that you would call and be like, hey, can I get a Google Ads campaign up and running? We can do that and we do that, but we're going to ask you some brand questions first to make sure that when you do run that Google Ads campaign, it links back to who you are as a company, and internally and externally, everything is communicating well together. So that's what we mean when we have a brand first philosophy, or our process is called brand powered approach. So that's kind of what we mean.
Right. It's like a character or language that you've built as a brand so that everything ties back to how that character would respond to this, or what on colors, I guess that's the simplest part, but it's really about putting out something that's recognizable throughout the entire process rather than just saying, "Oh, this is pretty. This is nice. We kind of like this."
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes there's so many different, uh, influencers and educators and scholars who have written about branding, and there's a lot of books out there, so everybody has their own definition of branding and what a brand is. I've described it many ways, so I've just kind of gotten to this point where I'm like, I don't really have a definition anymore, but we can describe it however you want to, but basically you could describe it as just a big idea that all of the stakeholders in a company collectively create together. um, and you know that term stakeholders is not just internal people or people that have, don't confuse it with shareholders. Stakeholders is like your customers. They have a big voice when it comes to saying what your brand is. And then, your competitors also have that voice, your employees, the executives, the board. So all those people have viewpoints that go into making this brand what it is. So we take all those things into account when we're looking at and evaluating a company.
Wonderful. So that's very foundational, and it's amazing that you can do it all in one go rather than just kind of being that order taker, which is super important and makes a good marketer. You've built a team that crosses branding, video, content, and strategy. What does creative leadership look like for you these days?
For me specifically, there's a lot like that as creative leadership you would want to do, but you're not always able to do because of constraints. You have to make sure that, you're actually servicing your clients. You can't just put them on the back burner all the time to do whatever you want to do. I would say, probably for me, creative leadership would look like you, especially for creatives. This might not apply as much to industries who are very mathematical or very, um, just nuts and bolts, I guess. But for creatives, I think you have to build in the creative time or time for the creative process. So let's say that you're building a proposal for someone, or you're building out a quote, or someone wants to know how long it's going to take. You have to consider not just the amount of time that it's going to take to execute and, physically type on the keyboard, copywriting, or physically designing on the computer an image or whatever. You also have to take into account all of the thinking time and all of the brainstorming time and all of the research time, all the Googling time, all of the time that your team takes to communicate and collaborate and talk to each other internally about that one client, because that's where all the magic usually happens, is in those conversations or in that ruminating and thinking in your head on trying to find an angle that sets this company apart from another one. And I found that a lot of times when you don't take that in consideration, you get a lot of scope creep happen on the project because you just spend a whole lot more time thinking or communicating than you thought you would. So building that in from the beginning helps a lot, because then it gives designers the time. It relieves some pressure. So some pressure is good, deadline pressure is good, but too much pressure will cause creative blocks and burnout. And so you want to make sure you have this nice balance of giving them giving the creative mind room to breathe, I would say, and also as a leader, respecting that time. If you are just a taskmaster and you're micromanaging everyone and you're not really trusting the instincts of creatives, then you're going to get a worse product in the end. But if you give them the time and you kind of trust them to come up, because sometimes creative ideas will hit designers or creatives or copywriters in the middle of the night when they're going to sleep, and they won't remember it the next day. So like it has to come out a few days later, and you have to build in all of that time and grace, and just let them cook, as the kids say these days.
I love that.
I'm not that old. I'm not that old. I can still say it.
Let them cook. See, I'm trying to. I'm getting to the age where it's finally hitting me, where I'm like, that my term is not what you would use. Wow, swag does not happen anymore, apparently.
Yeah.
But you're completely correct about the creative time, and that's why you have to plan ahead and give yourself that time and try not to do things last minute because you need to give yourself and the creatives time to breathe and also time to communicate with your client because it's all about the collaboration. And if you're going back and forth and about ideas, which is where the magic happens when you're having those conversations, managing those expectations and having them come in about what's worked in the past for them, who they feel they are, then you can go back and say, "Okay, I see where you're coming from that. Maybe we can go this way." And then they're like, "Well, maybe not that way." And we're like, "Okay, well, let's go in the middle." It's that whole collaboration time and that's where things actually get done that are going to make an impact, not just kind of rinse and repeat.
Yeah. It's very messy. And that's another, I guess, aspect of creative leadership is how do you manage that mess without infringing upon the creativity and creative freedom. And I would say having defined systems and processes in place help a ton because then everybody knows, okay, this is step one, this is step two. However, you can't be too rigid with that. And, this isn't manufacturing. You can't be like this always, every single time. It's not a conveyor belt. It's like you have to build an overall broad process, but you have to build in flexibility to the process so that there's room to move around. And so if let's say your process is just like a bucket of, okay, we need to come up with campaign, big idea. Okay, that's the process, but like how that actually happens, it could happen at a coffee shop, it could happen in your office by yourself. It is just, you never really know. So I think, maybe you could say creative leadership is about managing the mess.
That's perfect. I love that. You should brand that
I
on your
should, yeah,
t-shirt.
I'll get a tattoo.
Perfect. Right beside the mustache.
Yeah. Oh, so people don't know about this, but I have a mustache tattoo. I don't know if this is video or not, but
Yes, it is. You manifested your
wait.
mustache with the
All right,
tattoo.
everybody knows it now.
I called you out.
You go.
But, you can also look at that in terms of advertising since our agency is directly paid advertising. One size does not fit all, but also maybe the first step is not what you stick with. There's all testing and what's working well, and maybe you can make some adjustments. And if that adjustment is working really well, you can continue with it. If you see half of it's working well, then you can take that other half and adjust that part. And then if you see, oh, wait, maybe this isn't what's working, you can test and go backwards and see maybe after a couple of months if it's going to be the right choice for you. So it's all about being flexible and not staying too rigid and saying, this is what we're going to stick to and this is what we promised. It's the ability to go in and be like, okay, this is where we should actually go because we've noticed these trends.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say this just kind of popped in my head, but I would say brand and branding is by definition opinionated, and marketing is by definition experimental. And so what are those two things that have in common? There's a lot of subjectivity and there's a lot of creativity. So part of positioning work and branding is all about your opinion. Now you do research to kind of give you a foundation and make sure that, okay, we're aiming down the right lane. But at the end of the day, you're going to make a claim and put your flag in the sand and say like, this is our spot. Why is that your spot? Well, we have some of this research, but we also think that we're just different because, we believe this, we believe that, we have these values. So it's subjective and very opinionated, but it's a collective opinion informed by your competitors, your customers, your board, your executives, like everybody. And then marketing, I think one of the biggest mistakes, at least in my experience, that companies make, executives make, is this assumption that if I invest a little bit in marketing and we just get a campaign up and running, I'll get a return in 2 months or 3 months or even 6 months. And that is not the right mindset to have because, again, marketing is an experiment by nature. Because I mean, think about it. You build a campaign informed by research. You think it's going to do well, and you have data to suggest that it will do well, but there's no guarantee that it will do well. So how do you mitigate that? Because I'm sure if you guys have executives listening to this, they're going to be like, well, then why am I putting any money into marketing? If there's a risk so high, well, why do you put your money in a stock market? Like you have to put yourself out there, but not blindly. Make sure that you're informed. Put yourself out there, have a plan, have a strategy in place, and then test it. And I'm kind of piggybacking off of what you said. If you have, don't just throw all your money out there right out the gate. You have a test budget, like start with something reasonable, get some data back in, get some results, and then see, which part is doing well, which part's not doing well. Then when you find that, put more money into that direction and kind of remove the other directions and trim the fat as you go. And eventually you'll have a well-oiled machine that's bringing you that ROI that you sought after to begin with. But this does not happen overnight. And then on top of that, I would say that you need a strong brand underneath that as an engine to fuel it if you really want to achieve more success than you would have gotten if you just launched out the gate with a campaign. So yeah, I don't know how we got down that rabbit hole, but what's your next
We just go
question?
down them, you know? We're we're following what's the oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the rabbit in Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, you mean the name?
Yeah, the name.
Oh, I don't know his name.
Does he even
I
have a
just
name?
know he's very pressed for time.
He's ready to go. He's gotta
Mhm.
go. But, you have to take those educated risks in order to grow. Sure, it might seem scary and feel like you won't get that ROI right then and there, but it's the only way you're gonna have a long-term ROI.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like uh, I don't know if this is a good analogy or not, but like when you're a kid, like you want everything right now, and you can't wait. You have no concept of like, oh, if I delayed gratification now, then I'll get something better in the end. That I see that a lot with companies as well. And no, I'm not calling companies childish. I'm just saying a lot of times we want that ROI immediately, and you might actually be able to get that. I'm definitely not saying that you can't achieve that. What I am saying, if let's say you do achieve a short-term burst of ROI and success, you may be sacrificing long-term success if you're chasing a trend or if you're doing something temporarily. Now, if you plan on selling off your company, then great. That short-term success is fantastic. However, I would argue if you don't have a strong brand in place, is the company worth selling? Will someone want that if it's not differentiated and they just see another competitor down the street that is seemingly better? So there's all kinds of things to take into consideration when you're running a company or trying to market a company. It's 2025. Everybody is every market is saturated with competition. I don't know of a market except maybe, I don't know, quantum cosmology or something like that. I don't know of a market that's not saturated, and at least in the industries we work with. So you have to do that brand work because otherwise you might just be throwing money down the drain trying to compete and at the level that some of these bigger players are competing at. So it's a balancing act. I would never say that brand is more important than marketing or marketing is more important than brand. I have my opinions, but you have to have all the pieces. If you want the most success, you have to have all the pieces. But it's a loose sliding scale. You can kind of choose the amount of success you want. And there is a little bit of luck involved, but a lot of it is just planning and strategy and kind of going after a certain angle and threading the needle, so to speak.
Absolutely. And a lot of brands chase shiny objects or trends. How do you keep clients to stay focused on the bigger picture while still adapting to what's current?
Hmm. Um, I think you have to be diligent about, is this trend ephemeral? Like, is it gonna just, blow up and then go away? Or is this something that seems like it's gonna stick around? Now, obviously, there's prediction in there, right? You can't tell the future, but you can kind of tell whether or not a trend's gonna be successful. For example, short form video on Instagram or TikTok. That was clearly a trend for a bit, but I think a lot of people quickly realize that that's going to become the new dominant format. Whereas you know, let's just say TikTok dancing, for example. That was a big trend when it first started, but at least on my feed, I don't really see much of that anymore. I know that it still exists. I know companies probably still have some success from it, but now it's turned into a full blown like business platform, with ads and everything. And so I would say if you were if you were a company, maybe you're a manufacturing company, maybe you were getting down with a new dance in the boardroom, uh, for TikTok, maybe not. But if you were a company that kind of chased that trend and it's no longer irrelevant, then you have to switch up what you're doing. But if you chase a trend such as, oh, we need to do more short form video content, that is very valuable. So it just depends on what the trend is. But I would say stick to the fundamentals first. Make sure your brand is strong, build out your brand, make sure that's good to go, then take it to market, or refresh whatever you already have in the market, and run your campaigns, and then add on those things that you want to test. It goes back again to what we were talking about before with having a test budget. You can also test in other ways. For example, if you see a trend or you see an advancement or you want to dip your toes into AI, test it out, run it, see how it performs. Maybe you have one blog article that you wrote by hand, you have another one that the first draft was written by ChatGPT. Launch them both, see which one performs better. Now, there's confounding variables, obviously, because you might have different topics. But my point is, don't don't put all of your eggs in the trend basket. Like, nail down the fundamentals of brand and marketing, and then add on to that some tests. And don't ignore the trends because some of them might stick around.
Absolutely. That's a really good perspective. I was actually thinking about the TikTok dances too, because you'll see them sometimes, but it's more in passing. And it used to be that everyone was doing that one for weeks and weeks, and then it would just die, and then they'd go into another one. So, did you ever learn any?
I didn't.
Oh,
Some trends just need to die. Um, that might
yeah.
be
I don't.
one
I
of
was over here doing the one I know. I don't. I can't even do it right now. So don't even let me embarrass myself.
them.
So you mentioned acting as an AOR for many clients. What does a healthy long-term client agency relationship look like to you?
Oh, okay. Well, so two of our values, I would say, are transparency and flexibility. And so, for us, transparency is just, I mean, it's kind of what it says on the tin. It's being honest and open about if there's an issue, call the client, confess your mess up or the issue or whatever it is. I mean, if it was a mistake, you would confess the mistake and say, we messed up, we dropped the ball here. Here's how we can make it right. Don't go into that conversation without a plan on how to fix it. Um, and then if it's just like something that didn't go well, but nobody really dropped the ball, we also are transparent about that. Like when we give monthly reports, we say we don't just give all the good news. I've seen monthly reports by some vendors before, and I'm just like, all I hear is good news. And I'm like, like, I don't thank you, but at the same time, I don't know. I feel like I might be conned here a little bit because it can't be good all the time. So just kind of being honest and open and say, here's the performance. This month didn't really change up or down. We're just going to keep going because obviously the alternative would be we stop, and that would not be good. Now we could increase, but that's going to require more time and resources. So we're even keeled for now. That's good. We're still getting the same success, but that's one, transparency. And then flexibility for us means we're small and nimble. So our agency is small. But that we consider that a strength because it makes us nimble. We can quickly respond to a client. We can quickly make changes, and we have a more down to earth relationship with each client. But flexibility also means creative freedom to us. Actually, I think freedom is one of our other core values. That's what I meant to say. Three of them. Um, and by freedom, we mean kind of having the space to do things a little different or have that creative freedom and have that creative space to create trust between us and the client. Say, hey, we are in your court doing all these things to the best of our ability for you. And in return, you get the success. But the request is that you would trust our crazy ideas. So, and sometimes people have different views of agencies, but a common one that I've seen in my experience is sometimes agencies are supposed to be fun to work with sometimes, not frustrating. So, for some companies that are in industries that are very cut and dry, very successful, but not the most stimulating environment, sometimes people look forward to talking to the agency because they get to talk about cool stuff. They get to talk about branding and marketing. And if they're not involved in that all the time, that might be exciting to them. And then you have people who are involved in that all the time, and they're kind of watching us like a hawk to make sure we do well, which is great. We welcome that because we should be doing well. So all that to say, I think being AOR, maintaining a good client relationship, really at the end of the day, just comes down to the same old tactics that you would use in any human relationship. So you've heard it said before, probably business is built on relationships. It's people that you're dealing with really at the end of the day. And so the same way that you would treat a stranger or a good friend, that's how we try to treat our clients. We try to do away with all the formal language and the formalities of being super uptight, and we just are honest, transparent, person to person, people to people, and we're all here to make money and achieve success, and each one of us has our own disciplines on how to do that and our expertise and where to do that. And so we try to play to everyone's strengths and put everybody in their lane where they're going to run the fastest. And I think if you do all of those things and you maintain these good relationships between people, then you have a good client agency relationship. If you don't, and it just feels transactional, it might not last as long because, if you're just transactional, then the agency down the street can also do that. There's not a whole lot of value there. But if you feel like you like the other person that you deal with at this agency or at this company, then you're going to stick around longer, even if you could get better results somewhere else because you just like that person. And so I think that's my main takeaway is that we're all humans at the end of the day. So if you do business like you're a human and not a robot, you're going to have better business.
Absolutely. And I can vouch for that because the moment Caleb and I met, we were just yapping like we were friends. So when two creative agencies find each other and we're all like, oh, we can be ourselves. Yes, we love it. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Over coffee.
Over the best coffee.
Coffee. Yep.
And then, like, going back to something that you said about collaboration and being honest with the client about whether things go good or not. When something doesn't go as planned and you had it all set up and the data showed that that would be the best route and it wasn't, and you have that transparency and honesty, and that's what brings in true collaboration to where you can say, okay, well, this typically works and all the data showed that it does or is supposed to, and it's not. So this is going to give us the opportunity to pivot and find what is working, because if you just keep saying the good news and beating the dead horse, then their results don't change and grow. And if someone is willing to hang on for the ride, it's so worth it in the end.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially if you're not doing, um, because like I said, we're full service. So we do paid, but we also do organic, and organic is definitely a long-term game. So you, you said, hanging on for the ride. That definitely applies to organic because whether it's social media or SEO, blogging, things like that, you have to do that for many, 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 many months if you plan on ranking organically or showing up in the feed organically or growing followers or website traffic. So yeah, definitely hanging on. And I would say, to piggyback off your point, um, you something that I've learned over the years is managing expectations before the project even starts, and just setting expectations, saying, okay, here's the plan, here's the strategy, we're going to run with this. There are no guaranteed results. Now, in certain types of paid channels, you can guarantee results. Like, for example, if you have a billboard, or if you run even a digital ad campaign, there's certain math that you can work out where you can guarantee a certain number of impressions for a certain amount of money. And if you know the close rate, the lead to sale rate, and all of those numbers, which in my experience, clients typically don't know because companies don't track, not every company, I would say most companies don't track all of the metrics that they need to track. But if they do know that and you have all that data, then you can have a pretty good estimation of, using cost per click, cost per 1,000 impressions, or cost per conversion. Especially after you start running it and you get some data back, you can have a pretty good idea of what you can churn out of that system. But it's not cut and dry and set in stone. It it's always evolving, and what worked one month might tank the next month because your ad creative people now find boring. And so you have to, it's very experimental and evolutionary. You have to kind of evolve with it. So because of that nature of marketing, I found that setting those expectations before you even begin helps lessen the frustration that the client may feel later on when you do have to deliver that transparent honesty of, okay, we thought this would work, it did not work. So, because here's the difference. If you say, we thought this would work, but it didn't, our bad. That's what you would have to say if you guaranteed them success in the beginning. But if you manage their expectations first and you don't guarantee them success and you just say, this is the plan, and based on data, this is our best informed strategy moving forward, and we expect or estimate these kinds of results. Then when you hit that negative, then you can say, okay, we thought this would work, it wasn't going to work. Here's how we're going to pivot. You don't necessarily have to say like apologize, because no one did anything wrong, because everyone agreed at the beginning that this was the best strategy moving forward. So we move forward. If it doesn't work, there's contingency plans. We have a pivot point. We have another plan that we can use. If this segment's not responding, then we can move to this other segment. If they don't respond, we can try this thing. So you have to have plans on plans on plans, or strategies on strategies, however you want to say it, whatever word you want to use. Instead of just being so tactically minded all the time, you have to have a strategy that is sitting above all of that and informing it, which is another thing that we mean by having a brand first approach, is making sure that you have a strategy of some kind and you're not just running with tactics and trying every new thing under the sun, or even tried and true things. Google ads, Facebook ads, they're all effective, but if you do them in a silo and everybody's running their own thing within your company, then nobody really knows what the brand is about. And nobody's really, you might get some sales, but you're not really getting any loyalty or or love from the customer. You're just kind of getting transactions. So which one's more valuable to you?
Right. Because, you might have those quick few sales in the beginning, but then there's no consistency. And then with the love portion, you might not get those first sales in the beginning, but you'll have an abundance in the end, because then they'll have the opportunity to talk to people and really build your brand. And someone might post about it on social media, and then it starts to trend and it becomes a whole thing. So it's all about patience. But also making sure that you're communicating.
Yeah. And love.
Mhm.
All you need is
Yeah.
love in your
All you
marketing
need
campaign to be
is
successful.
love. Dun,
Yeah.
dun, 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 dun.
Maybe we should start a hippie agency and that's how we pitch it to the client.
That's amazing. Let's do it. Let's just called love, and like it's like the peace sign.
Yeah. Yep.
But
Just
then your finger has to have the mustache on it.
walk into the board meeting with the pitch dressed in hippie garments and saying, all you need is love, man. And then you get fired. That's what would happen.
They'd be like, "Who is this? Who let
Yeah.
him in? Security?"
Yep.
So you'd mentioned this a little bit before, but a lot of brands think that brand is a logo. How do you help them connect what they say to how they sell?
This is one of my favorite topics and things to tell clients about. As you can see, my hat says brand pilled. This is kind of something, this is a concept that I coined and came up with because most people have this mistaken idea of what branding is, or they think it's just a logo, and it is. I don't want to say that they're wrong when people think that. It's just like a small tiny slice of what branding is, um that it almost it kind of erodes the value of what branding is, if you just think it's a logo and your visual design. Now, don't get me wrong, some logos have become incredibly iconic, and really you could make the argument that that's all they need is distinctive assets. In fact, if you've ever read How Do Brands Grow by Byron Sharp, or anybody else, any other knowledge coming out of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute in Australia, I think it's in Australia. Don't fact check me, please. But they all talk about distinctive brand assets, and that's what really matters. And then you have people in another camp that would argue, okay, yeah, it matters, but your purpose does too. So it just depends. There's so much opinion. There's some weighty opinions in this industry. But what I like to do is explain that regardless of where you sit, there is more to branding than just a logo. So how do you connect all of that from, conception to the implementation phase? I would say there's two steps here. One is realizing that you need more than just a logo to be a strong brand. You need a vision and mission. Now, many companies and executives are going to come back to that statement and say, well, we have a vision and mission. Okay. A lot of times the vision and mission will be something like, we shoot for the stars. Great. Great. How do your customers relate to that? Because I don't know what that means. So, like, that's obviously an exaggeration. But my point is that you have these lofty statements, and they should be lofty to some degree, but they should be grounded in reality with the research that you've done. And so you need a vision, you need a mission, you need values, you need a personality to your brand, which comes out in a brand voice. So you can't just have a visual identity. You can't just have a logo. You can't just have colors. You need a way of speaking so that whoever's writing copy for your brand, they need some sort of guide on how to transform this textbook chat GPT that chat GPT spit out for you now that we're in 2025. And how do I rewrite this and edit it so that it sounds like our brand name or our brand? That has to be codified. And in order to codify it in a brand guidelines document, you have to come up with it. But you can't just come up with it out of thin air. Now, you can, like, if you're a startup, then maybe, but there's a million startups and a million other companies. So you really need to make sure that you start with research and then talk to your customers, talk to your prospects, talk to your leadership, talk to your employees, talk to your competitors. Maybe you can't talk to them. Maybe you just research them online, but get all of that data in and then synthesize it into, okay, this is how we're different. This is what our mission is. This is where we're going, which would be like a vision, like our end goal, end state, or the change we want to see in the world, our impact. What do we believe in? How do we operate on a daily basis? That would be your values. And then I already said difference, but yeah, your positioning. So like why would you choose me? I always use this example since we're talking about coffee shops. Let's say that a coffee shop is on one street and on the other side of the street, you have a coffee shop. Why would if everything was equal, right? The taste of the coffee, the flavor, the ambiance, whatever it is. Let's say that they're almost identical. Why would you choose one over another? That would be the work of branding, to influence customers to get away from this other coffee shop and come into yours. You got to give them a reason to do that beyond price and beyond just the taste of your coffee, because price is going to be a race to the bottom of the barrel if you just try to compete on price. If you try to compete on your product, that's a good strategy if you can be truly innovative and better than everyone else. The problem is there's always a better company out there. And so you really need the brand and the branding to set you apart. And all of those other components I mentioned come into that. But then you have a second problem. Once the first hurdle is gotten over, in this explanatory process to executives, like we work with CEOs, we work with marketing directors, we work with everybody. And once you get them to kind of open their mind a little bit to, oh, okay, branding is wider than I thought it was. It encompasses more than just a logo. Then the next hurdle after you do all of that is, okay, great. I have this brand guidelines book, shiny new book. What do I do with it? Because the second issue that I've seen is that they get that shiny book or they already have one before they come to work with us. And it's been collecting dust for 20 years in the company janitor's closet or something, or it's dying away in cyberspace on their computer. So that tells me that you have an implementation problem, not necessarily a like a codified, like it's not, you already have the book, you just aren't using it. So there's many different ways, probably more than we have time for on this podcast, but just a few examples, like your values. When you go to hire somebody, you can use those values to vet whether or not they'd be a good fit with your company and with the culture that you already have built, or if you're starting from scratch, the culture you want to build. So you might have, here's a good question or a good way to kind of parse it out. If you have two candidates and they are equally qualified, like you could take either one of them and you've got this choice where you're like, I don't know what to do because they're both perfect. How do you choose one over the other? That's a really difficult situation. You could flip a coin. I mean, that's totally valid. But if you want a little bit more strategy behind that, you could use your core values, because chances are their belief systems, their values internally for them personally are probably a little bit different. You would want to hire the person that more closely aligns with your company. Where do you get that information? You get it from your core values and your brand guidelines document. You need to dust it off first and open it up and read it. So once you do that, that's just one example. So hiring, you could also do the same thing to vet vendors and partners. Do they share the same working philosophy that your company does? And if you don't have a working philosophy, give us a call, because that's what we do. We help people develop branding and brand strategies. That's my pitch.
Perfect.
Shameless pitch. Um, but another one is, let's see, operations. You could use values in operations. I just went to Whole Foods the other day, and in the dairy section, I happened to look up, I never look up at the ceiling, but I happened to look up and they have their core values like just plastered across the entire upper half of the wall. And I was like, oh, look at that. That's great. They're actually implementing it. Um, and then there are other more tactical implementations of things, like differentiation can get very tactical. If you are, I don't know, let's say you have a novel product, maybe you want to reach a novel audience on a novel platform. Maybe you want to do only TikTok. Maybe you're a manufacturer and you only do TikTok. Would that be lucrative? I have no idea because I haven't worked with your company yet, but it would certainly be different because there's not a lot of manufacturers on TikTok. So it could be something to try. So it really comes down to, how are we different? What are we selling? Who are we? What are we about? And then how can we take what we've worked on as a brand and physically and tangibly implement it? And because there are hundreds of ways to do that, and each one is unique to each company, we help clients do that. And any other agency like us should do the same thing. Instead of just selling a brand strategy, when you get into like a retainer relationship or something like that, where it's more ongoing, or you're implementing something for someone on a month to month basis, we consult our clients. We're always available on email or phone, and they could just call us and say, hey, so we're doing this thing, we're doing this tactic, we're running Google ads or whatever. How can we implement this part of our strategy? And then we have that conversation and we say, okay, well, here's a few ideas that we have. You could do this, you could do that. And so it's it's very much a case by case basis. But I mean, I would encourage people to, I've mentioned AI a lot because I'm trying to get up to speed, being a young man in this fast moving marketplace. But just go to ChatGPT and ask it, how do I actually implement my brand strategy? Things like a vision, mission, whatever. And it'll give you some ideas. It'll tell you, like, here's how you would do that. You could use it in this place or that place. And so, Yeah, I mean that's those are the two hurdles I would say is first you have to get people to realize that branding is more than just a logo. And there's a lot of research to support this as well. I mean, I could, I have a bookshelf over here of a bunch of branding and marketing books, and you just pick up one of them and you got all kinds of stats. Like companies have seen X percentage increase in sales that have a purpose statement compared to those who don't, like things like that. And so there's hard data out there if that's what you need for, to be sold on the fact that branding is more than a logo or visuals. And then from there, you just got to get it implemented. You can't let it sit on a shelf.
Absolutely. The way I explain it sometimes is when I was in a lot of script writing classes and doing all of that, we learned that when you're writing a book or writing a movie or show, whatever it may be, you go before you're writing anything, you flesh out every single character. What are their personalities? Why are those their personalities? What happened in their lives to make them the way that they are? Whether
Hmm.
or not that piece even makes it into the story, it helps the person that is writing have a different voice for each of the characters and the way that they would react to a situation. So if you're thinking about a manufacturer, what kind of, if you think about the personality of a manufacturer, what kind of platforms would that personality be on?
Yeah.
And how would they react to this kind of content? How would they speak on maybe a world issue that's happening, whatever it may be? Like what's their favorite color, to make it simply, you
Yeah.
know what are their mental health issues? I'm just kidding, but
Yeah. Could be important.
yeah. But you just it helps you know how to apply it.
Hmm.
And, like if you're looking at those two like people that are applying for your company and they're both qualified, they're the perfect fit, and you don't know which one to pick, you figure, okay, who would this personality fit? Or like who would they pick? So,
Yeah. To piggyback off of that and kind of, drive the nail into the coffin, so to speak. That's morbid. That's a terrible analogy. I'm
it's
sorry.
kind of bad.
Um, anyway, so you got like I guess, I bring home the concept of research. Uh, you need to relate that what you just said to customers. So let's say you do develop a personality. Well, as an executive, I would say, if I were an executive of a company, I would say, okay, well, that's all fine and dandy. You're telling me that I need to create this persona or this personality for my brand. How is that going to get me more sales? Like how am I going to, like, how do I know that that's going to relate to these customers? And the way that you know that is you do the research ahead of time and you directly ask the customer. You interview them, one-on-one interviews. That's what we do. Or you can send out a survey. Um, both of them are going to give you different quality results, but if you ask them things like, what do you value in this brand? If you could describe this brand as a person or a human, how would you describe it? Things like that. And then you take that from the customers, you put it together with a similar interview that you've had with leadership, a similar interview that you've had with some employees, a similar interview, maybe not an interview, but some research from competitors, because you can look in, a lot of them have what they say on their website. And you put all those pieces together and you say, okay, what are the common denominators between all of these? What's the common thread here for personality that we can pull out? If you do that, then the personality that you codify for your brand will relate to the customer because you already asked them about it. And so if you do all that work without research first, that's our first stage or our first phase in our process is research. Because if you don't do all that knowledge gathering first, then you're really just shooting in the dark. You're coming up with stuff and there's no, it's, I've mentioned earlier that you can't guarantee it, but this is even less than a guarantee. This is like way less. You don't even know what's going to happen. You have no idea. There's no strategy. So, yeah, the research is really important, getting those perspectives so that you can craft what you were talking about, which is, things like personality or telling a story. How do you know that story is going to be relevant to who you're telling it to unless you get some information from them first to build your brand story? And then when you tell it back to them, they're like, oh, they're speaking my language. Well, yeah, it's because we we talked to you first. So that's a pretty big mistake that companies will make, is skipping that research. And I've heard it from others too, where they have done research, but they didn't find any value in it. I would say that either the right questions weren't asked in the research, or the content and answers you did get back were not analyzed and strategically uh, put into a framework that makes sense for your company in a way that you could utilize it. And if you don't know those two things, then of course you're gonna think, well, this is just, we wasted money on this. But all information, or at least I would say most of it, 80% of knowledge and information is valuable. Um,
Right.
Maybe 20% is not. I don't know.
And I mean, honestly, maybe it's comes back to they didn't like what they heard. You think about McDonald's and you ask for ice cream or milkshake or whatever, and they all always talk about the ice cream machine's down, the ice cream machine's down. And I'm sure that's not their favorite thing to be known for. But
Yeah.
if they had a campaign and they ran it addressing that and like making it joke and laughing about it, people would love it. I mean, people
Yeah.
still go to McDonald's, like no matter what. And also piggybacking off of that, think about Chick-fil-A. It has such a strong brand. And you go to McDonald's and someone might be rude to you and you're just like, whatever, I'm here for my burger, my Big Mac, I don't care. But then you go
Mhm.
to Chick-fil-A and you say thank you and they don't say my pleasure and you're like, oh my gosh.
Felt that in my soul.
I know.
Complain to HR.
Right. But that's how important it is and how much of a difference it makes. And I know that if I need to go somewhere fast,
Hmm.
I'm going to Chick-fil-A every single time because they will get it out in 5 to 10 minutes flat. And that's their thing.
Yeah. Yeah. People, of course, a lot of people have made fun of the My Pleasure thing with Chick-fil-A. I would argue that, I don't know, maybe it was intentional. Like, people making fun of My Pleasure has gotten them a ton of publicity. So there's, not all press is bad press. And so and I would say that's just one manifestation of what is probably a brand strategy level dedication to service. And if they have this idea of one of our core values is service, then they actually implement that, again, there's this gap, right? Because the amount of companies that have these throwaway terms like honesty, service, I try to avoid these because they become cliches at this point. Like, if you have a core value that says honesty, it makes me cringe, because I'm like, isn't that kind of like given when you're doing business? I don't know, unless you're a con artist, you should probably be honest. And so but if you actually implement that, like if you go, if, let's say service is, maybe it's not the strongest core value, but let's say it's really important to you and you plan on implementing it hardcore, that would make a difference, even though it may not be the strongest word that you've chosen, because Chick-fil-A completely like overhauled its drive-through experience to this well-oiled machine that amazes me every time I go through the drive-through, and I do not get the same experience no matter where I go in terms of a fast food restaurant. No other drive-through does that. And so, they've taken that. I wouldn't be surprised. What I'm saying is, I wouldn't be surprised if it was something that started at the conceptual level and said, okay, how can we take
Right.
this idea of service and really run with it? And then another, I would say, more shallow implementation of that is saying my pleasure, like making employees say my pleasure after every thank you. And
Right.
then you become known for that. But that is a form of a brand asset. Like, them saying the phrase my pleasure has become a brand asset to Chick-fil-A, such that when someone says it somewhere, they'll probably think of Chick-fil-A. And then they're like, oh, you know what? I'm actually hungry. Where am I going to go? Chick-fil-A. What is that? How does that benefit Chick-fil-A? They make more money.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
this is the circle that we come back to with brand and how it influences your bottom line. Because at the end of the day, everybody's in business to make money. But if I ask a company, why do you exist? Many of them would say, to make money. Okay, that's valid. So I usually ask it like, why do you exist aside from making money or making a profit? And then that's a hard question to ask. A lot of people haven't thought through that. And they're like, I don't know. I just come to work every day, or I just, now, if you're a more visionary executive, then you typically have an answer for that. But not everybody is, and not everybody has to be. But if you want to make more money, a strong brand can get you that. But it's not going to happen overnight. You have to build it and then use marketing. I think if you don't take anything else away from this conversation, brand and marketing are not, they may be separate disciplines, but they are so interwoven and intertwined that you would be leaving money on the table if you only addressed one of them and not the other. So if someone comes to us and they say, we just want a website. Well, our brand first philosophy says, okay, that's cool. We can knock that out of the park. But let me take a look at your brand first and see if it's conducive to that. Because if you want an amazing website, but your brand does not look amazing or give me amazing vibes, or it's not very strong, then your website's going to suffer. You can only put so much lipstick on a pig, so to speak. So, um, you have to address both of them. And, I would say they're both equally important. You have hardcore supporters of brand over here in the very like lofty conceptual land where they're like, purpose is everything. If you don't have a purpose, you'll never be a success. And that's clearly not true, because there's some like brands who just came up with something, ran with it, and made billions of dollars. So
Right.
that's obviously not true. But then you have people over here in the marketing camp where they're like, all you need is a campaign. You just need to run this one channel, this one tactic. That's what's hot right now. You need to go and put all your money in that. And they're also wrong. Why? But they're not totally wrong, because they've clearly gotten success that way too. So the best and most successful campaigns are the ones that do both of them. So you have Super Bowl campaigns every year, big budget ad campaigns. You could argue, of course, they spend millions and millions of dollars to do that. Yes. But there are also some campaigns that have just come through randomly throughout the past several decades that people remember still, because they've just been so iconic, and they maybe they didn't come through the Super Bowl, maybe they just came out of nowhere, but they made waves on social media or something because it was an interesting collaboration between their brand and this unique marketing campaign. That brings in the most sales and the most money, if that's what you're after.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think. There's when they bring in some celebrities sometimes, and make like Shaquille O'Neal wear a tutu or something silly like that,
Yeah.
involve somebody that doesn't really make sense to get. Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart is like genius.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you see him on he is a brand, first of all, and Snoop Dogg is an
Yeah.
entire brand of his own, but he was on The Voice and he's sitting beside Reba McEntire and they're best friends cutting it up, and it kind of takes you back to the Martha Stewart times, and you're like, it just follows him wherever he goes. That was his pitch on The Voice. He's like, I can't sing. I can't really coach you to sing, but I am Snoop Dogg. And they're like, okay, yeah, I'll pick you, Snoop Dogg.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, exactly.
that's what it is. And like going back to the Chick-fil-A thing, sometimes I think I'm like, where do they find these people? Like I've
Mm.
rarely had somebody that's like, "Hey, what can I do for you?"
Yeah.
And
I
I was at oh, sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I was just gonna say I can't speak for them because I've never worked at Chick-fil-A, and I've certainly never held a manager position at Chick-fil-A, but I would not be surprised if they had some core values, and if you don't live up to them, you're gone.
Oh, yes. I
Like,
had a
I
really
would
good
not
friend
be
that worked there.
surprised. You did work there?
No, I had a really good friend that worked there,
Okay.
and he was telling me that it was intensive training, like weeks and weeks long before you could even get on the floor. And if you don't follow these criteria, then you're out. Like you
Yeah.
don't sustain. And I'm not going to say the state that I was in because I don't want to offend anybody, but Caleb and I are from the South, and there's a lot of more hospitality sometimes. And I was in a state that's not known for their hospitality, and I stumbled upon a Chick-fil-A, nicest people I had met the entire trip.
They found like the 3 people in the state that that were nice. Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, it goes back to what we've been talking about, the core values you have, like expectations you set. Where do those expectations come from? Hopefully they've come from brand guidelines. Where did those come from? Well, they came from this long deliberating process of synthesizing research into who we are as a company. But then you take that, and yeah, they're super strict with their training, but it's informed by these concepts that they all want, not just employees on the floor, but managers, executives, leadership. They all must live up to those values.
Right.
And so, and yeah, if you weed out those who don't do that or won't do that, then you build a more cohesive brand.
Right. And I'm not
Um,
going to speak for them, but I'm sure they were doing the research before they opened up of what are the things that people don't like about fast food. A, it's fast food, but it's not really fast. B, people are rude. So phew, they knocked it out.
yeah, yeah, it's a good way to. And since you simplified it so much, I also have learned over the years that these things can be overcomplicated a lot of times. Like a lot of the time, it's probably simple, um, but it's hard to get to simple. It takes research, it takes strategy, and if you were to just go tell someone like, "Hey, I need you to pay me to write a single statement in a sentence," nobody's going to buy that. But sometimes those statements and sentences inform visionary development of product. Sometimes it informs a completely new innovation in your product department because you looked at that vision statement one day as an executive and you were like, you know what? I have an idea that this statement kind of prompted in my head, and you go take that to your engineering team. They're like, yeah, we could do that. We can make that happen. And then you make it happen and it becomes an amazing product. So it doesn't always have to happen that way, but all of these components are important to have in place, and it doesn't have to be super complicated. A brand strategy doesn't have to take 2 to 3 years to develop. You can develop it in a few months if you have all the research in place and you've done everything you need to do. You can get enough consensus to build something. Also, it should not be static forever. It needs to evolve with the culture. It needs to evolve. Even like I would say your microculture, like there's cultures within society at large. Like you might have your manufacturing culture in your industry. It needs to evolve with your industry as well. So and also sometimes, as a startup, let's say you do a brand strategy at the very beginning, by the time you get to launch, you've changed things or implemented new things, or maybe you're writing copy and you're like, oh, you know what? This is actually really good. I didn't think of this during the strategy phase. So let me circle back to the client and say, hey, it seems like everything that we're writing about is going in a slightly different direction. So maybe we need to revisit this strategy. What do you guys think? It's very collaborative and very flexible. And I think that, at least for my own experience and for our clients have to be comfortable with that back and forth and that flexibility if they want to build the strongest brand, because too much rigidity will cut into your sales at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And we've been talking a lot about clients and those kind of relationships, but what's on the horizon for Red Hype? Anything you're especially excited to explore next?
Good question. Are you asking me to give away trade secrets, Kenzie?
Yes, tell me all your secrets.
No. So we have been around as an agency from about 2010. Started as a small design shop, ended up kind of finding our stride in web design, and then gradually landed a big client, landed Caterpillar, the construction brand, and landed one after the other, got some more, and then over time, we built into a full service agency, and then we added on more digital marketing, and then during COVID in 2020, it's not really a rebrand. It kind of is, but not really. We still kept the name Redhype. Back in the day, we were just Redhype. Now we are Redhype Creative Marketing Agency, or RCMA for short. And that kind of happened in 2020, and we're on the very tail end of this slow refresh to the brand. And we revisited our brand strategy, so we're practicing what we preach. And we refreshed our brand identity, and we're working on kind of rolling that out. So this year is really kind of about launching that, at least the rest of it, because we kind of dripped it out here and there, but doing a full, cohesive launch as a new, hesitate saying new because it's not really new. It's just refreshed. It's new to us.
Took a shower.
Yeah, exactly. We took a shower. So yeah, and then of course along with that comes our own marketing push and our own growth, and so we're really kind of aiming at agency growth at this point, but we don't want to. We still want to maintain that small business or small team mindset and approach, so that flexibility, that ability to kind of be free and be very collaborative, consultative with clients. Those are aspects, those are our core values. So no matter what happens, we retain those moving forward, even if the team grows. So that's what's on the horizon for us. We're kind of entering a growth phase for the agency.
Amazing. Well, Caleb, it has been such a fun, refreshing conversation. So glad we got to catch up. Your take on creative strategy, storytelling, and staying true to the brand's voice really stands out. And I know our listeners are going to walk away with a whole new appreciation for the power of intentional creativity. So, for anyone who wants to learn more about Caleb's work and check out Red Hype's team's latest, head over to redhype.com or find them on LinkedIn to see what they're building. Caleb, thanks again for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course. Well, thank you guys for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.